For those who are just joining us, welcome to the Lightning Talk session. I am Peggy Barter-Stripe and work for Health Data Research UK. We have today 4 exciting speakers coming to share their project dealing with health data research and innovation. They each have 4 minutes to present their project, which is a really quite tight time. And because we have got a packed agenda, we'll keep them to time. But for that, please ask your questions in the Q&A, and we will answer the questions after all 4 talks are finished. So with 4 speakers, we have Liz Dobson from IBD Registry. We've got Samil Kader from Humancentric Drug Discovery, Ron Burdiss from EBO, Hakim Yadi from Closed Loop Medicine. So the one thing different is we will allow you to vote for your favorite project. So the session is going to run the 4 talks, then Q&A, then we will show you another short videos, and during the videos you can vote for your favorite project. And the winner of the most liked project will be announced in our closing session by Andrew later today. So without further ado, Liz, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peggy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Dobson. I'm the CEO of the IBD Registry, and I'm here to tell you about our COVID-19 IBD risk tool and how we help 34,000 people with inflammatory bowel disease, that's IBD, in a tool we built in 8 days in March. So, in 4 minutes. The story starts in mid-March of this year. The Department of Health, called the British Society of Gastroenterology, asked them if they could help to identify all patients with IBD who are at high risk from COVID-19. So the British Society, that's BSG for short, quickly prepared a risk assessment grid for IBD patients. The problem was then how to identify the patients in order to assess them. The hospital teams are trying to do this, but very few NHS trusts have this kind of information in one place. NHS Digital and other national organisations are also trying, but they didn't have the right information in one place either. The BSG had called the IBD Registry, that's us, to see if we could help. No one could bring this information together in a hurry, and confusion and patient concern were already rising. The solution, as we saw it, was to turn the problem around, to get the patients themselves to do the assessment. The patients knew all about themselves, if the risk grid could be delivered to them in an easy-to-use way. So we decided that we'd do this by building a self-assessment tool for people with IBD, based on delivering the BSG's risk grid in a simple way. Now, the second piece of the solution was that the healthcare team caring for the patient would find this patient and risk information valuable. So we also had to build a secure way of returning a list of patients and their assessment health data to each hospital involved. And so the COVID-19 IBD risk tool was born. So we didn't have the list, but we had the capability to build the tool, to build the list. Being the IBD Registry, that's the national registry, we had the national technical data collecting infrastructure, and we had the specialist skills, not least in information governance and data security, to build this, and fast. So that's what we did. We started the risk tool the morning after the BSG called. 8 days later, it was ready. Before launch, 2 days later, on the 1st of April. The tool allowed people with IBD to assess their risk from COVID-19. It gave them a downloadable assessment at the end. It was also a showcase for collaboration with the BSG, with Crohn's and Colitis UK, the National Patient Organisation, of AIMS, our health cloud providers, and with big mention for the huge support of the great Dr. Nick Kennedy. So we hoped we might be able to help a few people with IBD. By the end of the first week, over 27,000 people were in progress and over 16,000 assessments were completed. By the point when shielding ended in August, 34,297 people had used the tool. They'd associated themselves with 174 NHS trusts and health boards. Many people did the survey with IBD, did the survey more than once. This was okay. 26 assessed as high risk, 48% as medium risk. So the numbers are impressive. We know the clinical teams like the tool. The data return loop provided the gastroenterology teams with a valuable picture of their patients' needs. But what did the patients think? Let's have a look at the next slide. We heard back that people like the tool. They like being able to download the results. Can we put up the next slide, please, of the results? Thank you. They like being able to download the results, and they like that the information went back to their healthcare team. But the real insights came back from the feedback form. This was a simple form alongside the risk tool. We put it there primarily for operational problems, such as my postcode is missing. What we weren't expecting was that a wave of people, over 600 in total, would fill this in with thank yous and compliments. This was a real wave of impact. On this slide are just a few of the feedbacks that we received. The overwhelming response from people with IBD was of thanks for the clarity of the assessment and the reassurance that came with that. It was priceless in the time of a global uncertain pandemic. We'd set out to build a rest tool, but what we did was we delivered to patients the knowledge they needed for empowerment of their own disease understanding and management. It's still being used today. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you very much. So thank you very much for asking me to speak today. I'm a clinician and I'm also a scientist, and drug discovery is what I do for most of my academic side of things. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to get a concept together, and we're now in the process of establishing a startup called Humancentric. Next slide. So drug discovery is a really risky business. You can put in billions of dollars, and there's overall a pretty low risk that's then going to succeed to deliver a medicine that's going to work for patients. And that's a really big problem. And one of the key things that is missing from drug discovery, even today, is having human data. And so we came upon a concept whereby we would use a novel triangulation of data sets that are available. And I'm going to talk about at least one main type of data that we use today and how two other approaches can help supplement that. Next slide, please. So in order to be able to get human data that's relevant to drug discovery, we can make use of a fantastic resource that's available right now that is able to tell us whether or not that certain compounds that people are taking are actually effective for the conditions that they're suffering. And this is a data set called the Clinical Practice Research Data Link. And we thought to assess the usefulness of this data set by looking at patients with headache, a really prevalent and disabling condition that affects billions of people worldwide. And from this large data resource, we extracted out 500,000 patients with headaches across their 16-year patient journey. And we reconstructed for each patient every time they went to see their GP, every time that they had a prescription, so that we could then work out how their headache was being affected by a variety of factors, whether that be their social demographic status or whether that be drugs that they were being coincidentally prescribed. Next slide, please. And so by using various analytical methods, including things like survival analysis and Cox regression analysis, what we were able to do was to identify drugs that patients were being coincidentally prescribed that was having an impact on the individual's disease outcome, and in this case, headache. And so that's sort of shown on one of the panels there. And for example, one of the drugs that came out, surprisingly as improving patients' migraine and headaches, was loperamide, which is an antidiarrheal, not currently used for headache and migraine at all, but in our real world data set, we're showing some evidence of efficacy. Next slide, please. The problem, of course, with taking data from healthcare records is we don't know if that's just a false association. And so the other part of my academic work is that we build human models of disease. And so in my lab in particular, we can try to reproduce a headache in a dish. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that we can identify an abnormality of some patient cells, in this case, patient nerve cells, and maybe those patient nerve cells are hyperexcitable, and we can identify those drugs that reverse that abnormality and therefore might have therapeutic value. Next slide, please. And so by integrating these different data sources, and I've told you about the real world data, I've told you about the headache in a dish, but we can also get expression signatures from molecular data sets as well that tell us about disease and what drugs are doing to those signatures. And by putting them all together, what we can then do is to triangulate and validate across these different data sets to identify those drugs that are currently being used for other purposes, but may well have efficacy in headache and migraine. And so that can then be a launching point for repurposing, or indeed a launching point for finding new targets for diseases that really need new medicines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this. Very impressive. And Ron, you're next.
Thanks, Peggy. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for spending the time with me. Can I have the first slide? I'm Ron Burtis. I'm a business consultant for eBill AI, and today we'd like to talk about the practical uses of artificial intelligence in healthcare, primarily around enabling patient empowerment to manage their own services and be actively involved within their care plan. Next slide, please. Around 60 to 80% of the dialogue between the patient and the healthcare organization with inbound inquiries is very repetitive in nature. And these conversations can be easily automated by an AI-powered virtual assistant. More importantly, these virtual assistants can reside on messaging channels that are very common to the patient, such as WhatsApp, Facebook, Slack, Twitter, etc., where they normally communicate every day with friends and family. So why not the trust communicate with their patients over these same messaging platforms? This can automate these repetitive conversations and drastically reduce the overhead within a hospital addressing inbound calls, et cetera, but also increasing patient satisfaction and giving them instant access and satisfaction in terms of appointments, changes, self-assessments, and updates to their care plan. The next slide, please, Peggy. More importantly, you can amplify the voice of the patient. So you can integrate communications between the patients and staff members of the hospital and staff to staff in communication within the hospital itself. But also, more importantly, based on the patient event, you can trigger alerts to notifications to multi-agency organizations such as social care, education, and police to have a vision of what the DOH is trying to do in terms of a joined up social care, healthcare organization. The next slide, Peggy. Most importantly is employing a dynamic AI solution. So the virtual assistant is integrated within key clinical platforms within the hospital, such as patient admitting systems and electronic patient records, where these platforms have been traditionally siloed. An AI tool can access this information and complete an end-to-end transaction by a patient, such as I need to change my appointment, I need to cancel an appointment, et cetera, or I want to update some information on my care plan. This automates the transaction and reduces human intervention and increases patient satisfaction of care and their quality of care. The next slide, Peggy. Most importantly is patient choice. YouGov did an independent poll with over 2,000 NHS patients across acute community mental health settings. These patients were utilizing the NHS services within the last 12 months. It included generations from the greatest generations down to millennials. And 75% of these patients said that they would be very pleased to use an AI-powered virtual assistant to manage their services and get actively involved with their care plan. Next slide, Peggy. For the trust, it includes an enterprise approach. We talked about the patient capability of accessing their services within their within appointments, et cetera, all the way through. But for the trust, it can address DNAs, for instance, reaching out to the patients ahead of an appointment and having the patient actually confirm that they're attending. Also addressing areas within frequently asked questions, where's the clinic, what are visiting hours, et cetera. Again, reducing manual intervention between the patient and the hospital itself and automating these facilities. But more importantly, looking at clinical processes where the trust can automate through integrated communication, such as task management, bed flow management, et cetera, within the decision support, focusing on areas such as broadcasting results, looking at incident management, recording outcomes to provide facilities for auditing from CQC, et cetera. And within administration itself, looking at automating HR processes, addressing information governance and inquiries around GDPR, et cetera. Final slide, Peggy. I ran through that pretty quickly, but at the end of the day, what we're approaching at with this enterprise solution is to be able to empower the patient to self-manage their own needs and get actively involved with their care plan, which improves the patient outcomes. Integrating communications between patients and staff to staff, which will increase satisfaction between both entities. And most importantly, harnessing the critical information within the patient admitting system, EPR, and even patient portal information that can deliver real results quickly and instantaneously. All this, it has underlying significant financial benefits all the way through. And that's, I don't know if I did that in 4 minutes, but that's me. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ron. Thanks a lot. And then finally, Hakim, please.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for HDR for this platform. My name is Hakim Yadi, and I'm the Chief Executive of Closed Loop Medicine. At Closed Loop, we aim to give every drug its real-time digital companion to be able to improve outcomes and optimize therapy for patients. And today I want to share with you the work we're doing for hypertension patients here in the UK. Next slide, please. Hypertension will impact over 1.5 billion people by 2025, and the optimum treatment intervention combines both a drug therapy, but also non-drug therapies, lifestyle, diet, exercise, coaching, and wellness. And that's a complex set of interventions to personalize for an individual. Of those patients, only 55 are actively being treated, and fewer still have an actively controlled blood pressure. And one of the many reasons for this is that many of the antihypertensive medications have intolerable side effects. And this means that patients are either dropping or not complying to the regimen that's been prescribed. And those side effects are often linked to dose. And dose optimization is something that we do very poorly in health systems, primarily due to the lack of available doses. And as a consequence, we hear stories of patients asking patients to cut, crush, or nibble tablets to get to the right dose for them. Now, in my worldview, nibbling tablets is not 21st century medicine. Not when we have the tools and technologies to be able to capture real world data and inform care regimens at a much greater level of personalization. Next slide, please. And so that's what we're doing at Closed Loop Medicine. We are co-developing software as a medical device alongside drugs, taking that combination through clinical trials and working with the regulators to regulate it as a single product, meaning that a physician can prescribe and a patient can receive an integrated care package, a drug and a non-drug therapy, all under a single prescription. But to do this, to create this new class of integrated therapy, we have to work with the regulators, but most importantly, conduct the appropriate clinical studies and work with patients on what they need. Next slide, please. So what we've started is a study called Personal COVID BP. It's a decentralized, data-driven, phase 4, prospective, community-based study, where we're looking at how we can optimize a therapy at an individual level for a patient with hypertension. This is a study that's been funded by Innovate UK. We're running with our partners at Queen Mary University London and Barts Teaching Hospital. And we've worked with patient groups to design the study and design the features of the app. We've been able to redesign this clinical trial so that patients who are currently shielding can enlist, and we're recruiting up to 1,000 patients over the next few months. And we've also incorporated the ability to monitor COVID-19 symptoms. It's been shown that there's a comorbidity between COVID-19 and patients with high blood pressure. But ultimately, what we're aiming to do is to be able to provide real-world, patient-driven insights to personalize their therapy regimen. And to do that through a clinical trial setting, which allows us to then take a new type of product to the market, one that puts patients in charge of their care. And that's all from me. So thank you, and hope I've kept to the 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Well, I am very impressed with all of our speakers. They've all kept to 4 minutes, and explaining complex project in 4 minutes is quite an achievement. Sorry. So thank you very much to Hakim, Ron, Zemil, and Liz. I'm going to open the floor to questions, if we have any, but whilst they come in, I've got a quick question to all 4 of you, actually. So you're doing amazing innovation in health data research. Any learning, any things you've learned on the way to doing your project that you care to share?
I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks we have with our technologies, as Ron Burtis with EBO, is the adoption of social media platforms in terms of information government data protection. That we've overcome that. We're currently deploying 2 sites at East London Foundation Trust and Somerset Partnership through our partner Servalec that has the Rio PAS EPR platform. And we were able to work with the information governance and data protection people to assure them of the security of the likes of Facebook, WhatsApp, and Slack, and the safe use of that all the way through. But I think now NHS is embracing digital technology, particularly due to COVID. I think is accelerated in embracing these kinds of technologies for use to reach out to their patients.
Thank you. Liz, did you have, I mean, you walked at pace. So.
Yeah. For us, I think it was collaboration. Everyone came together so fast, and that was what really powered the project forwards. And that was a great thing to be part of, and there was a great result. So that's my keyword: collaboration.
Fantastic, Zamil.
Yeah, I would follow on from that and actually say that working with data has been something of a steep learning curve. And also what's been interesting, I guess, is the different parties who've been interested in the type of data that we've been producing. It was really only through a collaboration both between academia and industry. And so I really reinforce the idea of collaboration, that we were really able to take this forward and get it to realize some of the potential that I think is there with this type of data. It kind of needs thought processes sort of from different perspectives to really be able to gel together and produce things that I think are potentially very transformative.
Thank you. And the King?
Yeah, I just fully endorse that. We wouldn't be where we are if we hadn't had that strong collaboration with the clinical team at the William Harvey, at QMUL, the patient groups we've worked with, and then the teams within CLM. But I think the one thing that's been the fundamental learning is to test every assumption when it comes to digital engagement, digital receptivity, and making sure that you build with the patient in mind, and working with patient groups very early has been something that's really led to us being in a much stronger position than we otherwise would have been.
Thank you. Hakim, I've got a question for you, linking onto that. It's how have you found trying to have a trial like that run through the ethics governance processes? And did you hit any barriers because of the novel design?
We've hit barriers, yes, left, right, and centre, particularly with the regulators, on how we would structure this study and with ethics. But I think what we've been very pleasantly surprised by, particularly the likes of the MHRA, who have come back to us and said, we recognise that you're trying to disrupt and innovate. Let's pick this apart and work out which bits are the priority to you and work out how you take this through. They've not acted in any way as a barrier, but they've acted as a collaborator, back to the previous word, but not to try and break it all at once. Really pick and choose those areas that you're going to work proactively on with them.
Thank you. Sorry, moving from there, another question from the Q&A is, how do you feel our regulatory landscape could be more enabling whilst maintaining quality to the panel?
Well, as I said, from what I've seen from the regulators, I've seen a really willingness to engage and a willingness to innovate, but wanting to go in steps.
I mean, I think for me, I think it's about keeping sure that we have the dialogue going with the regulators, because I'm not sure we know yet what we need to enable to take this forward. It's a new landscape that we're navigating. And I think we need to learn together to be able to understand that. So, for example, in my area of drug discovery, using the type of data that we're using, we're generating human data, but regulatory approvals for getting drugs that come through these novel routes may be very different to how it was, a number of years ago. And I'd like to understand better how we address some of that to be able to get these drugs through perhaps more efficiently, but safely at the same time.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, again, it's around information governance and the use of social media. But I think the trust, as I mentioned, are embracing these technologies now because they need to reach out to their patients, particularly during COVID, where they can't come into the hospital, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And so I think the regulators are embracing these communication channels. Thank you.
I think we're running out of time, so I want to say a huge thank you to Liz, Ron, Zanil, and Hakeem from the number, the pace from Liz, the AI automation, the drugs for hypertension, and the drugs for migraines. I mean, this is all amazing, amazing development and innovation. So please vote for your favorite project. We will announce the winner later, and I will leave you with a video. If you want, after the break, you can, don't forget to go to the agenda for the links to the other sessions. Thank you very much.